So as it's still very close to being New Year, I don't know what point in the year you're supposed to stop saying Happy New Year to people, but Happy New Year. We're still going. We're still going strong. And obviously one of the things people do at New Year is they look at resolutions. I'm not a big fan of resolutions. Apparently, I think last week was the cut-off where the majority of all resolutions were already in the bin. Most people don't make it past the first couple of weeks. I don't really do resolutions, but I do often find the Christmas, New Year periods a good, helpful time to reflect, pause, and go, okay, I've actually got some breathing room. What is the next year going to look like? How are we positioning ourselves? And obviously, having just been at the conference we just mentioned, being in a place that's almost saw 500 salvations in 1 year, and these amazing stories of healing, someone getting gifted a building and that was going to be turned into a mosque, getting gifted this building supernaturally, only then to find out that it was his great-great-granddad, I think, who actually set up this church 200 years previously. So just like these incredible stories of faith. And so I've been asking over the last few weeks, like, God, what are you saying to us? And obviously these events going away are, like I say, are opportunities to kind of lift your eyes. And I feel like there's an invitation today for all of us just to kind of lift your eyes again. Lift your eyes back to God and ask him what he might have for you. And whatever kind of difficulties you found in 2024, I'm sure it wasn't smooth sailing for everyone, or whatever challenges you feel like you're sitting in now or are about to step into, I feel like there's an invitation to not let disappointment steal your ability to dream again with God, because we do serve the God of the impossible. So as I had all this kind of swirling in my head over the last few weeks, I was asking the Lord, like, what are you saying to us as a church? And I felt the Lord say this to me. I'll put it up on the screen. We have everything we need to have massive kingdom impact here in East Lothian. We have everything we need. Now, no offense to anyone in the room, or my first reaction wasn't, of course. My first reaction, if I'm honest, was like, really? We have everything? We have everything we need? Surely we're missing something. Now, are any of you good at building IKEA furniture? Do we have any experts in IKEA furniture? I feel like I've done it so many times. Mike's an expert in IKEA furniture. I've got so many of those little mini Allen keys now. I've got a jar of them. Anyone else have a jar of them? And I should just buy a set of Allen keys because I can never find the one I need because they're all slightly different. But yeah, IKEA, and the thing I like about IKEA is when I like the reduce section at the end. Do you know when you go into the bit with the bargains and like some of them have got a little chip out of them, or you're like, what is wrong with this? It seems fine, and you're trying to, but the problem is you've got to then, because they're already fully built, you've got to then dismantle them and get them in the car. So I've had a couple of occasions where I've been like, I'm sure I can get another piece of furniture in this car as I'm like trying to squeeze it into every space. But I felt like that was almost like a picture of what the Lord said to me, that like all the pieces are here. That's the worry, isn't it, when you get the flat pack furniture? Are all the pieces here? I felt the Lord say that all the pieces are here, that we have everything we need to have massive kingdom impact. We have the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is more than powerful enough. We have the power of the Spirit, and we have the people of God. We have everything we need right here. We have the ingredients, the gifts, the talents, the experiences, the people in this community that we need to have a massive kingdom impact in East Lothian. And we all get to play our part. And one of the things about growing and having a big impact is that we kind of always have to straddle this tension between, it's not about us making things happen in our own strength. There's nothing we can do to strive to make things happen. But at the same time, it's never about us sitting back and going, okay, God, if you want to do something here, you do it. It's always together. We all play our part, but we also lean on all of God. I like this verse in Colossians 1. Put it on the screen. To this end, I strenuously contend with all the energy Christ so powerfully works in me. This is that tension between we work hard, but we're doing it with not our own strength, but with the energy of Christ. And so today I kind of want to explore a little bit how we can grow up together. How can we more fully bring all the ingredients that are in this community together and work towards what God might have for us. So we're going to be looking in Ephesians 4 if you want to follow along with me. We'll have it on the screen as well. I'm going to read a slightly longer section, and then I'm going to kind of zoom in a little bit in the middle. So this is Ephesians chapter 4. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to one hope when you were called. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But to each of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. This is why it says, when he ascended on high, he took many captives and gave gifts to his people. What does he ascended mean except that he also descended to the lower earthly regions? He who descended is the very one who ascended higher than all the heavens in order to fill the whole universe. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by cunning craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself in love as each part does its work. Okay, there's absolutely tons in that passage that we could look at today. Paul begins this whole section of Ephesians focusing in on our unity, that we are all one, that we have one Spirit. And he goes through that list, doesn't he? One body, one Spirit, one hope, one Lord, one baptism, one God working through all of us. So he begins with that emphasis that we are all one. And it's always fascinating when we talk about unity in the church and unity across churches. I don't think unity comes from us making ourselves united. I think unity comes from recognizing we're already united. That we start from a place of unity and we just need to rediscover that we're all one in Christ. Everyone who is in Christ has God working in them and through them, all the same God. There's this massive oneness and this unity. What unites us is way stronger than anything that could divide us. But then verse 7 says this, but to each of us grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. So we're united, we are very much sharing in the same salvation, the same God who saved us. However, every one of us is graced differently. Now, grace is such a big word in the Bible. It's everywhere. For it is by grace you have been saved. And it's the Greek word charis. And grace has at least two possible meanings depending on the context in which it is used. Firstly, probably the one that you're most familiar with is the idea that grace is undeserved favor. This is the saving grace. This is the favor of God that we didn't deserve or work for, but God gives to us. We don't deserve it, but he gives it freely. That is grace. Sin had held us captive. We were once blind. This is the amazing grace. We were blind, but now I see. So grace is the heart of God towards us, giving us favor that we didn't deserve, access to God that we didn't work for. But grace also has a second meaning, and the second meaning of grace is about God's empowering. God giving us power. The empowerment of God. So grace is a little bit like the fuel in the tank. It's the result of the Spirit in our lives. So not only are we forgiven and given God's favor that we don't deserve, we're also empowered by God's grace. And this is the way the Bible talks about it in that second sense of grace. So we're given, not only do we get salvation, we're also given the strength and the energy, the infusing of the Spirit that actually enables us to live and follow God. Trying to do it without God's grace in your life is like trying to run the engine without fuel. So this is the second meaning of grace that Paul's talking about here. He says, to each of us, grace has been given as Christ apportioned it. Everyone in the body has been empowered differently, given different power and different strengths. Unity is not uniformity. We're not all the same. But the gospel births diversity, a difference of gifts. I'm going to skip forward a little bit. At verse 8, he talks about how when he ascended on high, he took many captives. This is a picture of Jesus winning that spiritual battle, but I don't have time to go into that today. We're going to skip forward to verse 11, and we'll put it on the screen. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers to equip his people for works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So Paul now gets a bit more specific and says there are specific gifts. There are 5 that are listed here that Christ gives to the church. And the purpose he gives these gifts for is that we would grow up. That we as the people of God would become fully mature. So you've got apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. There's different names. People talk about these in the church. So you've got the fivefold ministry. Has anyone heard of fivefold as the description here? Some people translate the word pastor as shepherds. And so they use the acronym APEST, which I feel is a bit harsh because you're not a pest. But it's like there's different ways the church has talked about this over the years, but it doesn't really matter how we refer to them. These are just these 5 gifts that are given to the church. And I mean, some people would suggest that these gifts no longer are in operation, or more specifically, some people prefer to think that only some of these gifts have continued because they don't know what to do with some of them. But I think the context of the verse is very clear that we have not yet reached the fullness of Christ, and therefore we need these gifts to mature us within the church. So these gifts are given not as we desire, but as Christ apportions them. So you can't just decide one day, hey, I think I'll be an apostle. Hey, I think I'll be a teacher. These are gifts given to the church by Jesus, and he decides who gets what and how it's kind of given. And all of these gifts, I would suggest to you, are designed for the local church to be used in a local congregation so that we can grow up together. You'll see lots of different theologies around these gifts, but I believe the primary emphasis that Paul has is that these 5 gifts are given to the church so the local congregations can be built up and established. Now, we live in an age where, sadly, the term Christian celebrity has become a thing. And there's nothing that could be further from the gospel, really, because we often think about, like, oh, maybe these 5 gifts are like the equivalent of, like, the celebrities, the ones that have really got it, the famous ones in the church. I don't also think that is the model that Paul is trying to give us here. You won't find any verses in the Bible that suggest that these gifts no longer exist. And so I suggest to you that we as a church, we need these gifts functioning within our local community. So we're going to take a little bit of time, just look at them briefly, each of these gifts. So the first one we have is the apostle. So apostle literally means the sent one. So it's someone who's sent on a mission. We know that Jesus, of course, called the first 12 disciples apostles. An apostle was a term that Jesus didn't make up. We sometimes think these words are religious words, but the term apostle comes from the Greeks. So the Greeks created this word apostle, and it was used almost like an emissary, like somebody who has sent on a mission. So the Greeks created this term, the apostle, the sent one, and the Romans later came along, and they took hold of this idea of the apostle, the sent one, and they used it for their colonization. So, you know, Rome at one time, I think, took up like a third of the world. It was this huge, big empire, the Roman Empire. And they would conquer people. And then the challenge they had was they would conquer the people, but the people wouldn't change to become more Roman. And so, you know, everyone's familiar with that phrase, when in Rome, do as the Romans. This is because the Romans had this idea that they wanted to Romanize the empire, which was to make everywhere like Rome. So they gathered this term apostle, and they would send apostles around the empire, and the goal of the apostle was to go with people of culture, so artists and scholars, and take them to regions and make those areas like Rome. So the idea was that if the emperor ever came, he would feel at home. It would feel like Rome. And so this is the term that Jesus decided to use for his first 12 and later for others to describe this apostle. Somebody sent from one place to another place to bring transformation. From one place to another place to bring transformation. This is what the apostle actually means. And apostles are kind of like pioneers or risk takers often. They're the kind of people who are gifted to take new ground for the gospel. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're sent off to deepest, darkest Africa. There's new ground that needs to be taken here in North Berwick, in East Lothian. There's all sorts of different kinds of apostles. They're often driven by a big picture vision of like, there's something we've got to conquer, there's something we've got to take. And their first concern is often not the comfort of everyone around them. They're driven to see a mission or a vision accomplished. Now, of course, I've mentioned to you that the term apostle was used for the first 12, but there are at least 25 apostles mentioned in the New Testament, which is why we can be confident it's not just a special name for the 12. There's 25 apostles mentioned in the New Testament, and these are beyond the people that even physically saw Jesus' ministry. So the apostle thing continues on through history, and there's even a female apostle mentioned in Romans for all the ladies out there. So this term apostle continues on. Prophets. Now, of course, we know our Bibles well enough to know that the prophets is a long line of prophets all the way through the Old Testament, but it also continues into the New. There's a number of prophets mentioned in the New Testament. The Pentecost, the coming of the Spirit, is a marker point for prophets. So prophets change. The role of the prophet changes at Pentecost. So you've got your Old Testament prophets who were the ones specially anointed by the Spirit to speak God's word to God's people to call them back to him. That was basically the role of the prophets. And they obviously in the Old Testament you get some odd characters, and sometimes you get some New Testament odd characters as well. But the prophets, they're primarily gifted to hear from God and deliver it. And the reason it changes at Pentecost is because now the Spirit has been poured out on all flesh. Everyone, it's called the democratization of the Spirit. Everyone now has access to the Spirit, not just the special prophet. So the role of the prophet is no longer to be the mediator between us and God. If any of these gifts function like that, they're unhealthy. The goal of a prophet is to help the people of God to learn how to hear the voice and follow him. But these continue in the New Testament as well. They play a vital role in the church. It's almost like the eyes of the church to kind of see where are we going and what's God saying in this season to us as a church to prepare. And there's examples in the New Testament. We don't have time to. We could do a full talk on each of these areas. But the prophet, again, they're often about, they're focused on what God's saying and what he's showing them. And so they're very often, again, not particularly concerned about people's comfort and care because they're like, no, God said it. We've got to go over here and we've got to do it and make it happen. And often prophets are misunderstood because they've got their eyes on the spiritual world more than they often have their eyes on what's happening here in front of us. So they're the first two, and they're probably the most misunderstood gifts out of these five. When I talk about the rest of the three, we're like, oh yeah, we know what they are. Okay? So we're coming to evangelists. Okay, evangelists are those who carry good news. That's what the word means. They're carriers of good news. These are the people who are gifted by God, again, the grace of God on people's lives, who find it easy to share the good news of Jesus with other people. These are the people particularly gifted to share. And there is actually only one evangelist mentioned in the whole New Testament, and that's Philip. So and sometimes they refer to the writers of the Gospels as evangelists, because you could say they're sharing the good news. But actually mentioned, there's only one evangelist mentioned in the New Testament. These are the kind of frontline people who often get frustrated, like, why are we even gathered in the room? Shouldn't we be out there saving souls? Like, what's all this gathering together when we should actually just care about the lost? We should be reaching out. So these people are often on the front line. They're passionate about people learning about the good news of Jesus. Like all the gifts, they come in different styles and personalities. So all these gifts get filtered through people's personalities. So evangelists are not always the stadium-filling people. They're not all the Billy Grahams who stand in front of 50,000. They might be the people who are just really good at getting alongside their friends and talking about Jesus. Evangelists take different forms. And the fruit of an evangelist's life is that people coming to Jesus. Next, we come to pastors, sometimes translated as shepherds. And interestingly, of course, you'll be aware that the term pastor, and particularly in America, has become almost the default for church leader. Kind of, it's the default word. How many times do you think the word pastor is used to describe someone in the New Testament? 0. There's nobody apart from Jesus who's used this term pastor to describe their function. So when Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, it's the same word that's being used for pastor. So I don't know why we picked that as the primary role, but shepherd got picked up as that kind of default. So like a shepherd, these are the people who are trying to keep a group safe, like the flock safe. They gather people together in safety, protect from damage, protect from the wolves that would come against the sheep. It's like this idea of protecting, making sure that relationships are healthy. So they care about the one-to-one. They care. They have that natural gift to, like, when somebody's in need, I have to respond. They're like drawn to people, and they care deeply about the kind of personal relationships within the church. They help people feel welcomed and safe and try and protect. They're the ones that rush to the hospital when someone's sick. Okay, teachers. These are the people who both communicate the Bible but also help people understand it. So it's like they understand and then they communicate, I guess is the way I'm trying to say it. And we have a number of people referred to as teachers. We know that in Acts, we read that in Antioch, a number of teachers and prophets were there, it says. James, the brother of Jesus, and Timothy are both explicitly named as teachers. And teachers are driven by the desire to explain things. So they're like, I need to understand how that works. Or they spend time thinking about things and going, okay, if that fits with that, and how would I best describe this in a way that somebody could understand? They take complex things and make them simple. And teachers are often playing that key role within, they all do, but to some degree, teachers playing that role of discipleship, helping people learn more about Jesus and the Gospels. Okay, so that was a very quick overview of those 5 gifts that Jesus gave to the church. Grace, empowerment, gifts. So why do we even care? Well, I think verse 12 and 13 are pretty explicit in why these gifts, these graces, are needed in the church. One of the fascinating things about it is that these gifts are there to equip the body for service. So we might be tempted to think that each of these 5 are designed to be on the stage and speaking from the front. But actually what Paul's writing here is that the goal that each of these 5 are supposed to be training the church in their particular giftings. So the success of a prophet is not their ability to stand up and prophesy. It's actually to equip the church so that the church can prophesy. The gift of the evangelist is to equip the saints in the ability to share good news. Can you see how this works? The gifts are not designed to stand at the front and tell you what to do. They're supposed to sit underneath the church and equip the church so the church goes and does the works. If we don't have that, that's when we become immature, without these gifts flowing in our church. So these gifts are given to equip the church. Like I say, these are not the Christian celebrities. These are more like the Christian training school, the people who are coming underneath and training. And if we want to be a healthy church, and the promise of this verse is that we all reach unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So while I've kind of characterized these gifts, all these gifts, and some of them you probably feel more uncomfortable with than others, all of these gifts are required for maturity. Without these gifts, we lack something. And I mentioned to you that, obviously 3 of those gifts people are more comfortable with. People are comfortable with pastors, evangelists. Well, pastors and teachers, people are more comfortable with. Evangelists scare us because they make us do things we don't want to do. And they got that boldness that scares us. Apostles, we don't really know what they do, but they seem to scurry around outside the church doing things. Prophets, again, they scare us a little bit because they say things that make us think, oh, I'm not sure where that comes from. They're seeing things on a different level. And again, these other 3 gifts, the apostle, prophet, and the evangelist, often get pushed out of the church into parachurch organizations. You'll notice this. Because the church has failed, and sometimes they've failed to steward their gift, but the church has failed to include these in the local body. And whether you believe in these gifts or not, these gifts are in the church. And there might even be people in the room here for whom you feel like that is a primary gifting for you. But what we need to have the maturity to bring all these gifts in and let them sit and equip us as the body. It's an incredible goal to have this reaching the fullness of Christ. So the question for the church is not that these gifts do no longer exist. It's about learning to spot them. So where are the apostles and the prophets in the church? Where have these gifts gone? And I suspect it's because we don't talk about them, therefore you don't get them. If you don't create environments for the apostles and the prophets to grow in their giftings, you won't get them. So it's important to say, I do believe that what Paul's primarily talking about here is individuals that are gifted in these specific graces. And the way that these graces work is that for someone to function in these gifts, it usually requires God to call them. In a private way, God speaks to you and says, I'm calling you as an apostle or a prophet or a teacher or whatever. But then also there's a second step, which is the public affirmation. So you get some people who will tell you, yes, I'm a prophet, and you go, okay, well, has the church recognized you? So there's all the gifts function like this, where you have a private, God gives you the gift, and you have a public, yes, we recognize the gift on your life. So we as the church play a vital role, whether we ourselves feel called to that, to recognize and affirm people in these gifts. Now, in the West, we really don't like titles. We really don't. We're nervous about giving people titles. And I feel it myself. I'm like, I don't know what title to give myself. We don't like titles. But if we miss out on recognizing these graces, we actually fail to get the maturity that we need. We need the apostles who are going to take new ground for the kingdom. We need the pastors who are going to make sure that we don't leave everyone behind. We need the prophets who are going to help us lift our eyes up and see what God is saying in our time, in our age. We need the teachers who are going to help us figure out the steps we need to take to get from A to B. We need the evangelists so we don't just become this holy huddle that we're all just about ourselves and we're not having an impact on our world. And we could go on and on about how the gifts are designed to function together. I want to come back to what I sense the Lord was saying to us, which is we have everything we need to have massive kingdom impact here in East Lothian. As I say, some of you might be sitting here going, actually, I've never told anyone, but I do feel like I'm called to one of these specific gifts. In that case, we as a church community, we have a responsibility to recognize those gifts, create space for those gifts, and encourage growth in those gifts. And if that's you today, I would love to chat to you. I'm sure Joe would as well. If you're sitting here and thinking, oh, I just couldn't couldn't put my hand up, but God's spoken to you, I would love to hear. It could be any of these gifts, but if there's something, someone in here, then don't be scared. There's nothing to be scared about. So we need, as a church, we need to make sure whether the people are, the 5 people I'm talking about, are in the room, or whether they're through relationships we have outside that we bring in, we need these 5 gifts functioning in our church to be healthy. So whether they're in the community or whether they're the people we have relationship with and we say, hey, we need the prophet to come in. And the prophet has to help us, equip us as saints to hear the voice of God. But either way, we need to make sure that we have these 5 graces in our church if we're going to mature. Now, most of you will probably be sitting there going, well, it's not me. Phew, I'm not one of these 5. But one of the interesting things we can do, and this is what I'm inviting everyone to do who's part of this community, is to recognize that these gifts can still be a helpful filter to think about how you're wired in God. So yes, I believe that specific people are called as, say, a prophet, apostle, teacher, etc. I don't think I have one primary gifting. I think I'm a mix of things. And most of us in the room will have a mix of things going on in your life. And it can be helpful to learn what that mix of things in your own life is, because it can help you understand who you are and what grace you specifically bring to our community. And that's helpful because once we understand the diversity that we have in our community, we can build better together. We can go, oh yeah, you're the teacher, great, can you help me with this? Oh, you're really good at hearing from God. Your primary leaning is towards the prophet. Can you help me? What do you sense the Lord saying over my life? And you can see how these gifts can flow in and out. So you may be sitting there going, I'm not an apostle, I'm not a prophet. But I'm inviting all of us to explore, where's our primary? Is there an area here that you lean towards? Is there, maybe there's 1 or 2, or maybe even 3 of these that are stronger in your life? They're probably something to do with your personality and the grace of God that he's given you. So if we're part of one body, we're going to have to learn to function all together. And recognizing the grace on people's lives is a huge part of what it means to be church. Like, this is a space where we're radically encouraging. We want to be like the most encouraging place. So you come in here on a Sunday and somebody says to you, one thing I really appreciate about you is this. And that's good on a personal level. That's good on a character and personality level. Like, I really, like, over tea and coffee, just tell someone, one thing I really appreciate about you is that, it could be anything, the way you greet me with a smile, the way you welcome me. But there's also a spiritual level to that, which is you're very gifted in hearing God's voice. I'm really inspired by the way you do that. Or, I love the way you explain things. It really helps me to understand. Maybe there's a teaching thing there, etc., etc. And the danger of not recognizing the gifts on people's lives is that we don't then receive. I'm going to put this verse up from Matthew 10. Jesus said this, whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. What Jesus is saying is that there's something about actually recognizing the grace on someone else's life and saying, yes, I see it. And that enables you to receive it. So the way I look at it is like in our church community, there's rewards all over the room. And it's as we recognize the gifts and the grace on each and one another's lives that we get to receive from it. When we're just like, oh no, I don't want to label someone, I don't want to pigeonhole someone, we actually miss out on something that they can give to you. And then we all become weaker because we don't receive the gifts. So this week, and I put it in the Connect, I'm inviting everyone to do a little 5-fold ministry assessment, okay? Let me put this up here. Now, I know the reaction people have to these things like this, because I have those same reactions, okay? There's lots of things I could say, but the first thing is, there's no right or wrong answer, okay? There's no failing this test. This is not a test to see how good you are or how great you are. This is just a tool, okay? This tool doesn't describe all of who you are as a person. This tool is not perfect. You might do it and go, I didn't like the way they asked these questions. These were unhelpful. You may even rail against this test and go, I don't like this test. That probably means you're a teacher if you don't like this test. Just being honest. But just do it, okay? Don't sit down and say, I've got an hour. I think it's 45 questions. Try and just do it. Gut reaction. I'm going to go for the question. It's like a most likely. It's like from least likely to most likely. Ask you questions. If you're not sure, just, put it in the middle. But what this will give you at the end is it'll tell you percentage-wise, like, as a pastor, you're maybe, 20%. You're this, that. And it just gives you a slight kind of curve to say, this is how I'm wired, okay? I'm not putting this up as a perfect test. I'm just saying this is one that's available and it's free, okay? It does ask you when you click on take full version, it will ask you for your email. You can just skip that. You don't have to give them any information, which is another reason that I chose this one. So you can just skip that bit and then just answer the questions. And we're going to talk about it in small groups. So at small groups, we're just going to have a little opportunity to share. And again, there's no right or wrong. We're just going to say, okay, what did you find? What did you find out? And I also have 2 paper copies. So if there's someone who's sitting who doesn't want to do it online, it does require you to do some adding up. So as long as you're okay with a little bit of adding up, then I've got a couple of paper copies here. You can also download a paper copy on the website. But I just wanted to do that because I thought, let's do something practical that helps us understand ourselves better so that we can learn what graces we bring into the church. Now, as a leadership, we do have a responsibility to think about how do we make sure these 5 gifts are all functioning in and through the church, because I believe it's a key to us in this season doing what God's called us to do. So when God said to me, we have everything we need to have massive kingdom impact here in East Lothian, I believe it's about recognizing the graces that are here and calling them to the front and saying, this is your time. We need you in this area. We need you in this area. We need you to play your part. This is not about one individual. This is about us as a community discovering our role as the body of Christ. And I just wanted to finish with the end of that section from Ephesians. Just listen to these words, starting at verse 14. It says, then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each of us does its work. Amen.